Okay, so I've been contemplating a few things. Um, as I always do, I kind of enjoy the idea of philosophizing about life. And many of you may have seen this philosophy presented where somebody has the jar and it's what's introduced to it is some golf balls. In this case, I'm going to leave this one out. I've used a small jar as an example to expedite the process and expedite the mess I'm going to have to clean up afterwards. But it's often asked if the bottle is full, at this point, where typically in a bigger representation of this, it's full with the golf balls, but then one then proceeds to introduce more things to the jar, teaching you that, there's always more space, more or less, or that, you can always include more. When something seems full, it's not necessarily full. So even in this case, there's space in between the rocks. And then just for simplistic sake, I'm not going to go that far, but you would take then, let's just take a pinch of it. This jar is starting to look pretty full, and you start introducing sand to it, okay? And sand will now work its way down into the very bottom. Okay, the absolute bottom, and this will fill up even more. And then at that point, it'll appear pretty jam-packed. At which point, then you'll start to introduce fluid to it and fill it up even that much more. And the philosophy behind the teaching is ultimately that the larger things in life, like the golf balls, are the larger things, and that's things that are of utmost importance to you, family, friends, things of that nature. And the smaller things, or the rocks, or maybe your cars, your vehicles, this and that, and the sand representing just the small stuff that happens on a day-to-day, the things that are potentially unforeseen. But the thing about this teaching as a whole is that there's one omission. There's the presumption that all of us are starting with an empty cup. And the reality is that most of us are starting with this right here. And now it becomes a question of, how do I fish the important things out of here? I can get this one because I haven't completely and bring it over into here. As there's another important thing down in here that's actually buried by a whole bunch of things that ultimately, I guess I would perceive now, knowing the philosophy of the story, that these other things are not as important. But now that I know that, you can't ignore and negate the fact that this thing right here does have a responsibility and obligation that you committed to at some point in your life. So in order to truly, respectfully and responsibly, dispose of this or renounce your responsibilities towards this potential object that you had acquired at some point in time and introduced to your life, you now have to draw closure to this. You either have to pay it off in its entirety, you need to sell it, you need to give it away, you need to break the contract, whatever it is, before you can actually remove it from your cup altogether. Because whether or not you physically put it in your cup, it's in your cup. So the challenge with the philosophy is that, in order to fish around in the small cup that you were initially given, that you've already filled up, because most people are living a pretty full life. Most people are living in a state of overwhelm, in all honesty. And something I come to realize years ago is that I'm going to stop putting things into this cup. I start, this cup over here, and I call this cup my business, and I've been able to kind of fish things out of my personal life that are of use in my business world, And slowly along the way, as best as I can, one stone at a time, I've been able to start filling up a new cup with things that are intentional, things that are going to serve the purpose of this cup, because I know what this represents. The thing being, this cup representing myself is actually carrying all the stuff that that brought with me as I began to develop myself as a child, as a person, as an individual. And by the time I've reached the point in my life where this philosophy now makes sense, I still have to comb back through all this stuff that I have introduced to my cup before I can move forward with this very philosophy, which once started with take an empty cup, introduce the most important things in your life to this cup, and then progress onwards from there, introducing the things that are next of most importance, and then so on and so forth. If you build yourself in this sort of way, you will have a strong foundation in life, and you will have the things that are most important to you always with you. But the reality is that most of us learn in life by stumbling through, failing, and making mistakes. As a byproduct, we've ended up with a lot of things in our cup that maybe we don't necessarily want, and some of us don't even really want to acknowledge that they even exist there any longer, because some of the sludge down at the bottom is really stuff that's taken up space, that's occupying one's mind, that's occupying one's heart space, but at the same time, you know, they can't really get to it to clear out the sludge, because like layers of the onion, you kind of have to peel back, you know, first things first, the most immediate things that are kind of the last things you've introduced. And so yeah, anyways, I love the philosophy, I love the principle behind the empty cup and introducing the things that are most important to you, and then, you know, breaking down the idea that even when things seem full and complete, that more can be introduced, but there is a strategic way in order to build oneself or build one's life in order to get these ultimate results, which is like, you know, let's call it maximum potential, let's call it utmost fulfillment, whatever you want to call it. But it's kind of symbolic of, you know, you can kind of have it all, but you have to put the ingredients in the right order in order to live a full and fulfilled life. So anyways, love the philosophy, but what I'm working on right now is kind of a standstill phase so that I can actually get to a point in my life where I could simply pour my life into a bigger cup. This is going to enable me to sort it quicker, isolate the variables that are important to me, and at the end of it all, discard the sludge and the stuff that really isn't of any importance. And as I build my new life moving forward, I can reuse the gift that God has given me, which is, you know, the original container, and start to kind of rebuild it anew, with a new intention, with new principles, with new guidelines, with this very philosophy that's taught in this teaching of the cup, or of the bottle being, you know, empty, and then introducing larger to smaller things into it. Okay, anyways, just want to share that because at times it's such an easy thing to kind of hide behind. It's a simple philosophy, but the actuality is the application of it isn't as simple, because one first has to achieve an empty jar. It's hard. It's easy to acquire an empty jar. I found this one in my house. I found this one. I got empty cups. But the reality is, myself as a reflection of the jar in and of itself is not an empty thing. I've accumulated many things over the course of time. Some of those things material, some of those things emotional, some of those things mental, some of them spiritual. And, you know, I have to kind of reassess and revisit and go all the way back through, kind of reverse engineer myself to find out how I got to this point, and decide what things I'm going to keep, what things have been serving me, I'm going to carry forward with me, and what things I'm going to remove, discard, or place somewhere else. So, anyways, story of the jar, and how I'm striving to get to this point where I can say, hey, I have an empty jar and I want to rebuild that. I want to rebuild myself into this idealistic principle of introducing to the jar the things that are most important to me, and things that are most secondary of importance, and moving onwards and onwards from there.